Welcome to everybody to my video of my trains on Westbridge Junction. In this particular video I'm going to be comparing and contrasting the two EMUs, electric multiple units, that were produced by Triang and Hornby Doubler respectively. Now both of these models date from roughly the same era. The Triang one, which is directly in front of us here, dates from 1957, although this model that I have, albeit being second hand, is somewhat later than that. I would put it at about 1962-63. The Hornby Doubler one, which you can see in the background there, and I'll look at in more detail just a bit later on, that model dates from 1962. Now actually, although they're different models, they share a number of similar characteristics, in that both of them are, if you like, I won't say compromised, they're generic examples based on real prototypes that were running about on the railway back in the 50s and 60s. If I can perhaps clarify that a little bit more, taking the Triang one here, which is immediately in view, looking at the front of this model, you can see that it looks like it dates from about the 1930s, based on a Southern Railway, perhaps two-bill, two-hal design, or even more than just a passing resemblance to the front of the Brighton Bell Pullman. So a very characteristic 1930s look there. But if we look at the actual side of the vehicle, size of the coaches, they are actually pretty close to British Railways Mark I suburban coaches. So it's a generic look, obviously utilising the tooling which they had of the suburban coaches, and then marrying that to a design of, or a frontal design of, a 1930s EMU. And I have to say it works. It's not accurate, but it was typical of the time. And when we look at the Hornby Doubler one, we'll see similar things there. Okay, so what I've actually done on this model here is to fit it with flush windows. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get the later ones, because you can open up the roof and get inside the model, so it enabled me to take out the Perspex back window, which left that rather large gap between the actual window crevice itself and the actual window pane, which somewhat detracts from the look of the locomotive, the look of the train. So I think it does considerably improve the look of the whole train formation. The other thing which I've done is, anyone who's familiar with this model will note that there's quite a bit of detail on the front, but it's all just green. So what I've done here is to actually pick out some of the detail with the yellow warning panel and the cabling. Of course, a nice touch on this Triang model is the frontal window with the V in it, which lights up. And if I get this going a bit later, then you can see that, and it looks quite good, and full marks to them for doing that at the time. So again, you can see how the frontal aspect is being improved with the flush windows and the picking out of the detail on the front, which is very characteristic of these electric multiple units. Also, what I've done, I took off the Triang buffers, which were the same for every single locomotive, train, wagon and coach that they were making at the time, and fitted some scale ones which were characteristic of these units. And also I've put on a hook with the a 3-link coupling on it as well, just to finish it off. So hopefully that gives it a much more realistic look and presence on the layout. That's the power bogie there, where the motor sits on it. It was a miniature motor, which was quite well designed, quite chunky and quite solid. And I think Triang did well to miniaturise the motor to get it onto that bogie. When I got this, it was it looked quite faded, so I repainted it. It just sort of makes it stand out a bit better. The other thing which I've done, if I just move along a bit to the centre coaches, these are standard Mark 1 coaches in green, and I've actually got a brake coach, so I can run these with a steam locomotive if I choose to. One of the other things it did was to paint the sole bar, or the underframe side, which you can see there. Also note the standard Triang underframe assembly which they had on all the coaches of this length, whether they were mainline or suburban. That's very much there. So that breaks it up a little bit, so you don't get the whole green side going all the way down to the bogies. The bogies are the later ones, which are much more realistic, and of course the coach roof opens so that an internal seating compartment can be put in. I have got, I think, a seating compartment in 1 or 2 of these coaches. The other thing I did was to pick out the door handles in a brass colour. Did that with a matchstick. Again, that just gives it a lift, and it makes the model much more compatible to run with the the current range of models of which are being produced. In other words, it doesn't look too out of place. So I'll just move that along there. You see the next coach, and of course this one's the dummy power car. Again, give Triang some credit here. Is they modelled the underframe somewhat differently on the powered and the dummy powered coach, so it gives it a slightly different look. Not sure whether it's accurate or not, but the contrast to the rest of it is, I think, is welcome. So just take it round to the rear trailing coach there. I've put a rear lamp on that. I have seen that from photographs, so that can be authenticated if you like. Again, the yellow warning panel, the cabling picked out, and it gives the ensemble a good look. Of course, over the years the green tended to change on the Triang, so there's some like a bluey green, there's some with a bit more yellow in them, but I suppose you have to sort of take that as it is. These coaches are not easy to find. I think you still get them, but it then just becomes a question of what condition are they in. So I think that looks pretty good. The running characteristics are not bad. It's a bit jerky, but when it gets going, it can run around quite reasonably smoothly. So I'll move this out of the way. One thing, it's very, very noisy. The driving wheels are knurled. A big drawback to these, as you can see as it's pulling away, is the distance between the coaches. I know that some people have actually made modifications with that, but that's not something I really want to sort of tackle. Hacking about on the bogie and things. Anyway, let's have a look at the Hornby Doubler one. Now, as I said, as with the Triang, the Hornby Doubler one is an odd sort of compromise, because what's actually modelled here is the units that I think they're later called Class 501, which ran between Euston and Watford, and I think, what was it, London Broad Street and Richmond. And they were on an unusual thing, 4-rail practice. Don't ask me what that is, I haven't a clue how that works. But they were later converted to 3-rail. I think it was to do with some prior existing electrification that was, which was already in place, and it was 4-rail, but very odd. Typical Hornby Doubler, they're tin plate coaches, beautifully finished, and what I was saying about them, the actual what do they represent? It's the 501 Euston to Watford service trains that it represents, but it's been finished off in southern malachite BR green with southern region numbers. Although when we look at the front, we'll see that it's actually the units that used to run from Euston. So why that was the case, I don't know. The colour of these back in the 50s, when they were introduced, should be dark green. All multiple units were in a very dark green with yellow stripes along the waist and along above the windows and finishing off at the front. But this one is very much in the style of the southern region. So have a look at the front, and again I've done a bit of work on this one. Now can I get that a bit closer? Okay, so what I've done with this one, very similar to what I've done with the Triang one, is to paint the front. Now there was already a yellow panel on there, but I overlaid that again, and I picked out the cabling, and the buffers were just typical sort of Hornby Doubler brass buffers. I filed them down, made them smaller, grinded them down and made the circumference smaller, and I put on these oval heads because these units ran with oval buffers on the outer coaches. I've sort of painted in the light that's in the below the orange cable holder there. Colour photographs of these things are very, very rare, and the ones that do exist, these units were filthy, but I managed to pick out the fact that the buffer beam was red. So I've tried to include those as best I can. The yellow warning panel should go all the way up to just underneath the windows, but Hornby Doubler squared it off and inset it a bit, and I wasn't too happy about the idea of trying to paint right up to the windows. I thought, no, I'll make a rod for my own back on that. So I just filled it in even more. Picked out the connectors in black, as indeed they should be. On the extreme left hand side at the bottom there of the front, just above the buffer, there's a transfer there, which was like a panel which had some writing on it, and of course I blacked out the middle window and put the route designation in. A lot of these seem to have B1 on the front. Don't ask me what that stood for. It obviously stood for something, a service between Euston and Watford, and that makes a big difference, I think. The graphics aren't correct, but couldn't find the graphics. I've just got a sheet of transfers. It had the letters and the figures on, and I put it on, and the actual representation of it on here does give a lift to the whole look of that unit. and of course the all-important route designation above that, and as you can see quite clearly, it says Euston. So that's very much the look of the Class 501 sets. So it's a very smart unit. Big difference in these how it's powered. Typical Hornby Doubler, let's get this back a bit. It's typical Hornby Doubler belt and braces approach to the power unit. Massive heavy bar going from one bogie to the other. Pickups on the rear wheels here, pickup on one wheel here, and the other wheel, just to be on the belt and braces side of everything, is got a rubber traction tyre. So there is absolutely no question of any problem with the diffusion. And of course, there's no miniaturisation of motor on the bogie here. It's that massive Ringfield motor that's in there, with this massive long bar which you can just about see going from one to the other. I think that's very similar to what they had on the Hornby Doubler Metrovic, the Class 20 and the Deltic. Again, it's standard suburban coach in the middle here. There's the trailer. So I've done the ends on all the trailers. Just take this round, and there you can see it. It's the same as the other one. Moving a bit closer, and you can see that there. Okay, so I'll give these a quick spin.